Building on 12b1. Okay, 12b1. The second paragraph on the left side. Here we go. Rav Huna. Okay. Rav Huna chatztulei chatzoda b'moyedo. It turned out that his workers reaped. They cut the tool during Chalamoid. Eisvei Rabba by Rav Huna Rav Huna. So Rabba by Rav Huna, his son, questioned his father. We're allowed to grind grain for the needs on Chalamoid, for our needs on the Yom Tov. But not for the needs of the festival. Also, it's an extra exertion that we're not allowed to do. Something that will be lost if left unattended, we're allowed to do on Chalamoid because of Hefsid Yisera, right? A great financial loss. Also, but something that will not be lost, we're not allowed to touch on Chalamoid. So where are we talking about? Things that have already been detached from the ground. The things that are still attached to the ground, even if all of it will be lost, it's forbidden to do the work on Chalamoid. Because the harvesting of the crop that is attached to the ground is very public in its very nature. You have to bring in machines and everything else to cut it. You're announcing publicly you're doing a lot of work on Chalamoid. But if a person has nothing to eat, in other words, the grocery store's a supply chain problem, seriously, and there's no food, right? You can do all of it on Chalamoid because at the end of the day, eating the Simchas Yontiv overrides everything else. Provided that you do not thresh using oxen. The paris. In other words, you can thresh and do everything you need to do, but make a change, right? Don't do it. We're good. What do you call it? Make a change. In other words, don't do it the normal way. But what do you see over here? That unless you have nothing to eat, you're not allowed to do it. So how could Rav Huna permit his crop to be reaped? So it says the Gemara. Now we're on 12b2. Amalei. It says like this. It's according to he said this baraisa that says you're not allowed to is only according to one individual Tana. And therefore we don't hold like him. The Tana, because we learned Klal Amar Rav Shimon ben Gamliel Mishum Rav Yosi. Rabbi Gamliel, Shimon ben Gamliel learned in the name of Rav Yosi, just Rav Yosi. Dabar Atolish Minah Karka, crop detached from the ground, even if only part of it will be lost if left unintended mutter. But something that's attached to the ground, even if everything is going to get lost, usher, because it's a too public of a work. You see that it's Rabbi Yosi. It's only an individual that holds this idea. Therefore, by definition, we don't hold like it. Says the Gemara, if that's true, Rabbi Yosi, it's only Rabbi Yosi. Then according to Rabbi Yosi, you should even be allowed, according to his shita, to thresh with oxen. Right? You should be able to. If it's detached, I'm allowed to thresh with oxen. Okay, so what's going on over here? Who's the one that taught that there must be an irregularity? In other words, you have to do it in a strange way, not in the normal way. So don't use oxen. Instead, do it by hand. The like Rabbi Yosi. It's not Rabbi Yosi. In other words, Rabbi Yosi says not only are you allowed to do it on Chalamoid, but you can do it the regular way. So how could you be over here that we said you provided the bachelor yodush prepares the paras? You don't do it with oxen. Says the Gemara, here we go. Since most of the days of the year you do not use oxen to reap and to thresh, don't get from now and say, oh, but on Chalamoid I got to use oxen. In other words, at the end, if the guy would use oxen a whole year long, Rabbi Yosi would agree. Of course you can use oxen. It's only in a case where his normal way of doing business is not doing oxen. That means now you can't start using oxen as well. Okay, we're good. Kerry, Jeff, so far so good. Good.
So far.
Tanu Rabban, it's not hard Gemara. The truth is, Tanu Rabban, you're allowed to grind flour for the needs of the holiday. But not for the yontif. You're not allowed to. But if one ground grain for the yontif and then there was leftovers, you're allowed to use them after yontif. As long as your intention was theoretically, I need all of this for yontif. If you have leftovers, okay, the world's not coming to an end. Says the Gemara further. If one cut branches to use for fuel on yontif, but if it's not for the yontif, it's aser. But if one cut for the use of the yontif on the festival, and then there was leftover firewood, it's still allowed. Same thing with beer. You're allowed to brew beer for the need of the holiday. If it's not needed for the holiday, it's not forbidden. But if you made beer for the ultimate, now there was leftovers, 12b3, it's allowed. Do not do a subterfuge. Don't deliberately prepare more than you need and then say, oops, I got leftovers. So, Frank, the Gemara, is that a fact that you're not allowed to use subterfuge? But we learned, you're allowed to prove here for the needs of the yontif. But you're not allowed to on Chalamoid. You think we're on 12b3. We're on 12b3. Whether it's date beer or barley beer. Okay? The barley beer requires greater effort. Right, there's more pieces involved. You got to get rid of the shells. You got to do the things. So there's more work involved. And even if you have enough older beer in your storage house for the yontif, you're allowed to, under the pretext that he might need it, brew new beer, and then employ what do you call marim? Go employ a subterfuge by drinking from the new stock. So you see, you are allowed to use a subterfuge in doing stuff and ending up with stuff after yontif. I see Jeff is smiling away. So says the Gemara Tanai. It's actually a machlokes Tanai. The Tanya ain't mamirim v'kach. You're not allowed to apply subterfuge. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, you are allowed to apply subterfuge. Okay, so now. It occurred that they reaped Rav's harvest on Chalamayit. Shama Shmuel Ipken and Shmuel got upset about this. Lema Shmuel be a sphere. Later, you're saying that Shmuel holds like the individual Tana, like Rabbi Yossi, that that it says you're not allowed to. It's prohibited to cut still standing crop that's mechuba lekarka, that's attached to the ground. Loi. It's a wheat harvest, and wheat harvest is not a financial loss if you leave it in the field. It's not a problem. It'll still be there in a week from now. It's not going to get ruined while sitting an extra week in the field. No, that's a good point. But Rav, my time of it, in that case, why did Rav reap it on Chalamoy? He could have waited. Number one, he didn't have what to eat. The great Rav didn't have what to eat. We said, if you don't have what to eat, you're allowed to cut. Inami, Adam Choshev Shani. Shmuel knew of Rav's predicament that he didn't have what to eat, but he said he's an Adam Choshev. He should have bought food. Cutting food on Chalamoid, radical was too public a thing, and people would get the wrong idea, given that Rav is was the head of the, was the Gadol Hador of the time. Okay, we're on 12b4. By the way, just before we get to it, just to address Jeff's smile, what's with the subterfuge? The answer is it's a halakhic question. If we've had it before, once I'm allowed to do something, how far can I go with that? They hold that once I open up the door, I'm allowed to do stuff for Yontif, on Chalamoid, for Yontif, to make sure I put on Yontif. I'm not limited in what I am doing. Because theoretically, every bit of food that I'm putting together here is theoretically going to be the food that I'm going to use on Yontif. The reality is, of course, I'm not going to use all of them. But at the time that I'm doing it, each thing has the possibility that it's going to be the thing that's going to be beyond it. In that case, we allow it. Okay, that's the logic behind it. That's the logic behind that law. Let's go further. 12b4. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya Nofat B'chumra de Medoisha. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya went out into the courtyard on Shabbos with a signet ring made of Madish wood. That's just the point. Okay, but he went out with a signet ring. Now, obviously, a signet ring cannot be used on Shabbos. Remember, until very recently, all letters were stamped with a signet ring. They would melt wax, and then they would stick the signet into it so that you would know that the letter was not opened or that the letter was sealed. So, and during the weekdays, he drank water heated up by an Arab, a non-Jew cook, which, as you know, who turned on the fire? Who did the cooking? Right? Samar Ramami Ikbid. Ramami heard and he was upset. Amar Rabbi Yossi, my time Ikbid, why was he upset? Is it because it was a signet ring which is forbidden on Shabbos? Is therefore muksa, since I can't use it on Shabbos, it's muksa. That's not so. We learned in a brayso, is shirin as monim v'atabois, brooches, nose rings, and rings. Are all like forbidden stuff that are allowed to be taken out into the courtyard for their use in their or their place. Even though, use it, you're allowed to wear it, because at the end of the day, it's a tachshit. It is a ornament. You can wear an ornament. It's because he drank water that was heated up by a Goyish cook, which is forbidden against Gentile cooking. Whereas we all know the mashkiach has to turn on the fire first. Anything that's normally eaten in its raw state, that means it doesn't have to be cooked. There's nothing against bishul akim, Gentile cooking. Since water is drunk in its raw state, in its natural state, there's no issue of bishul akim. So, for an example, if Yannick plugs in the urn on Shabbos to heat it up, the reality is it wouldn't be a problem of bishul akim on Shabbos, because A, we didn't ask him to do it, and B, not even on Shabbos. Forget that. Forget Shabbos. Right. But forget that. Not Shabbos. On the weekday. I meant the weekday. On the weekday, if Yannick would come in and plug in the urn, it turns out that he's the one that has cooked up the water. How can we use the water? The answer is because water is used raw, therefore it's not a problem. That's how come we can get a coffee from Starbucks. How can you get a coffee from Starbucks? They cooked it up. The answer is, number one, instant coffee is already cooked up. Number two is already, Number two, the water is not a problem. And even the grains, the coffee grains, are not a problem because they're edible by themselves in their natural state as cocoa beans. So therefore, that's not the issue. So therefore, why was he upset with him? The answer is Adam Choshev Shani. A prominent person is different. And again, it's the same idea. Amarav Chananel Amarav Koitz, it's Adam Dekav Moed. A person could chop down a palm tree on Chalamoid. Apabi She'eino Itzarech Ellen Shaloi, even 12b5, even if it only needs its sawdust. He needs the sawdust to pour on the floor. They had to, in other words, they had dirt floors. They were going to, they were going to sprinkle sawdust on the floor. Fine. Lie to love Abaya. Abaya cursed anybody who did this. Rav Ashi Abba B'Shalayna, because Abaya said you may need the sawdust, but for that reason I'm going to let you cut down the entire tree. Are you crazy? The sawdust is a drop of stuff. What do you need the whole tree for? That's too much work on Chalamayit. Rav Ashi Abba B'Shalayna. Rav Ashi owned a forest in Shalayna. Also, the mixer b'chol. He went to cut down some trees in Chalamayit for their sawdust. Amalei Rav Shila Mishalayna Rav Ashi. So Rav Shila of Shalayna said to Rav Ashi, "Ma datach, what are you doing? Kidi Amar Rav Chanan Amar Rav. That you're allowed to cut down a palm tree, even if you only need sawdust. Allah, the love of but I curse anybody who followed this ruling. Amalei, so Rav Ashi said to Rav Shila, excuse me, Loi Shemili, I didn't hear from Abayi's ruling, meaning, Kalaima Loi Shemili, I do not agree with it. Ishtamit Nagra Boyal and Mifsik Lashaka. As Rav was commencing to chop more trees, the axe slipped out of his hands and almost cut off his thigh. He realized that Mina Shemayim, they were telling him, don't you make light of Abayi's curse. Shavoke Bahadase. Rav Ashi understood that the fulfillment of the curse of Abaya, he left the forest and returned on his way and came home. Meaning, he accepted that if Abaya says it's not something to do, we don't do it. Rabbi Yehuda Shara Lemikra Ketana. Rabbi Yehuda allowed one to uproot flax, Ulamika Kishusa, cut hops, Ulamika Shumshe, and uproot certain plants on Chalamayit. Amalei Abai Rabbi Yosef is Lemikatisa Chazi Lechapifa. It's God's fine that Rabbi Yehuda allowed the uprooting of flax, since it's fit for covering food needed for the yontif. The flax, as we know, is like an esrog. You cover the esrog in flax, so they used to anyways, right? So there you go. Kishuta chaviz l'shikra. Hops are needed for beer. You're allowed to have beer on yontif. Elo shum shelamai chazi. The plants, what is their immediate use? What use can they have for yontif? And for the Gemara, chazil is nine spool. The seeds that are within it are usable on Yontif. Rabbi Yanai Abileyahu Pardesa. Rabbi Yanai had a certain orchard, whose time for picking came on Chalamayit, right? Knowing that they would otherwise be lost, Katve, he picked the fruits on Yontif. Now, what happened was, he did it because he didn't want to have a Hefsid Yisera. He knew that all his fruits would not be good if he didn't pick them now. But the people watching him, because he was a prominent person, didn't know his whole cheshbon. They thought it was allowed. This was an allowable, normal, allowable avodas on Yom Kippur, on Chalamayit. L'shana shehu, and the next year, kula amalis lepradaisu lekula demayit. The next year, everybody postponed the harvest until Chalamayit, when it was forbidden, because they remember that Rav Yanai took it out on Chalamayit. So Ikri Rav Yanai lepradaisu hushato. So Rav Yanai, in making tshuva about this, he abandoned his orchard to the poor for that year. He took no benefit at all.
Let's talk about halacha.
Go ahead.
Let's talk about halacha. Let's talk about ikar halacha. So basically, they cannot take on Chol Moed more than they're basically going to use Chol Moed.
Unless you think you're going to have guests, right? In that case, you can have it. And if the guests don't show up, no.
Those are hefsek also situation.
100%.
Okay, for us to run a slaughterhouse operation with X amount of employees, if we're going to bring them in Chol Moed, yes, some of the stuff is going to go Chol Moed. However, either we're going to do yes or we're going to do no. So therefore,
and I'll tell you something else. You're slaughtering it where? Inside, in Nebraska. How many Jews are around? Remember the Gemara we had before? The things that you're allowed to do outside of the Tchum, and if there are no Jews around. In other words, you have a hefset. Also, some of the meat is going to be used on Yom Tov. Every animal you shechted has an equal chance. In other words, remember, anything that's contained within a thing, each thing has an equal 50-50 chance of being used. So every animal at the time of slaughter has equal chance. The fact that a mice or something at the end will be left over, A, you're not in a public forum. B, you can't know that. Theoretically, a bubble of Satma calls you up, you won't have anything left. If someone's going to make a big Simchas Torah, right? Boom. So therefore, that's why. But I will tell you, if this was, let's say, you were doing it in Boca Raton, that might be problematic. You would have to do it on the QT. In other words, you would tell the people to come in at night, not publicly, right? Because that seems to be underlying the whole thing. Says the Mishnah Baita, a person is allowed to bring his fruits into the house because of the danger of thieves. Again, because of loss. And he may live. We're on 12b6, finally getting to the end of yesterday's Zadim. You're allowed to pick up the flax from the redding, so it shouldn't be lost. Provided that he didn't schedule it for Chalamoid. It happened to be, that's all. If the people deliberately scheduled it for Chalamoid, it's all lost. That's the way it is. Tana, we learned it's sin all the time. Basically, this is Agabar that we just talked about, Jerry. Provided that he brings into the fruits into his house in private, that nobody will see it, and generally permits the one thing. We're up to 12b6. Jeff, 12b6.
Okay, thank you.
Rabbi Yossi had some heavy beams that he couldn't leave outside. It was going to rain and ruin him. He brought him in during the daytime, when everybody could see him carrying it during the daytime. Amalei Abaye, so Abaye said, well, Tanya, we learned, you can only bring in the fruits privately when nobody sees you doing it. Amalei, here the privacy is obtained even by the daytime. Why? Since even at night, Jerry, your situation, even at night you need many different additional men. You need a lot of people who and they bring torches of fire unneeded. Ashrei Milsa, they cause a commotion. So therefore, even at night, if I do it at night, if I bring in the beans at night, it's still going to be bifahesi. It's still going to be public, since there's no difference of doing it by night or doing it by day. In fact, daytime is less of a commotion because people are busy by day. There's no torches, fires at night to light the way. It would be different. Obviously, if the nighttime provides greater privacy, like it would today, because we wouldn't use torches, etc., you would do it at night, which is what you missed it. We were talking to Jerry, that Jerry does slaughtering even on Chalamoid, but where's the slaughtering take place? In Nebraska. There are no Jews around. It's not a problem, because every part of that meat has a theoretical possibility of being needed for the yontif. There's going to be leftovers. No. But if it was in Boca Raton, for an example, the odds are, based on these Gemaras, that he would have to do it in a more private way. He would do it at night. That's all.
Where are you holding these hug?
Hi, Daddy. We're up to 12b6. Your days, I'm at days 12b6. We're about to get to today's daf. Vishula pishtayu min mishra, and you're allowed to pick up the flax from the redding as long as you didn't deliberately wait until Chalamoid to do this. If one scheduled the work to be done for Chalamoid, and before we got to Chalamoid, the person passed away, what is the law about penalizing his surviving sons to require them to forfeit the fruit or not? Do we penalize them or not? Now, here's the situation. If a father passes away with chayvis, he owes money to people. The children have a chiyuv to pay back the chayvus of the father. If there's a mortgage, if the father had a mortgage, they have to pay it back for the sake of the father. The estate has to pay it back. Okay, that's the way the world works, and it works that way today. In what do you call it? There's a mortgage with the bank. When it goes to probate, the bank is paid back. That's the way it goes. So, Tim Sulaiman. Now we're on today's stop. Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, 13A1.
But what if the father got a parking ticket and then he died? The son has to pay it?
You know what? Yes, the state has to pay it. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Why?
Because the estate is an extension of the father. I know. It is what it is. Sorem oisem pechar. In the case of one who nicked the ear of a firstborn animal. A firstborn animal is kodesh, is sanctified upon its birth. And went ahead and he nicked it so that it couldn't be brought. They penalized the surviving son afterwards, because blemishing a firstborn is a biblical transaction. If somebody sold his Eved Kanani, his Goyish slave, to an adulterer and then died. Now, if somebody does that, Bezdin forces him to go back and repurchase the slave that he sold, because an Eved Kanani, when he's bought, becomes a partial Jew. Actually, becomes pretty much Jewish entirely. He gets a bris milah. He has the laws like a Jewish woman, and he has to keep him. Now, if you sold him to a guy, he's not going to be able to do the mitzvahs. And Malam B'Kodesh Meridin, Kimtza B'noi Achra. We penalize the surviving son and make him repurchase the slave. Mishum Dechol Yoimim Mipkalei Mitzvahs. Because every day that he's the slave to the adulterer, the slave is removed from observing the mitzvahs. In this case, what is the law? Gabra Kanis Rabbanon. What is this man that was it the man that the Chachamim penalized for Lessa, and he's not here anymore? If he's not here anymore, because he's scheduled work for Chalamoid, he's no longer here anymore. So the person who scheduled it is not here anymore. There's no problem. Who Lessa? He's not here. The people, the Rabbanim went ahead and penalized his money. So the money is still here. The estate is here. Amalei says, Tinisua, we learned on Halacha. So the Shvi'is, Katzva, B'Shvi'is, a field that was cleared of thorns, loose thorns, not attached thorns. During the Shemitah year, Tizra L'Matzah Shvi'is is allowed to be planted after the Shvi'is, the year after. There was no problem with you clearing the thorns because they were not, you didn't thresh it. It was loose. But the Taiboy or Yadairoi, but if on Shvi'is you improved it with heavy fertilization or had animals penned in it to fertilize it, like Tizra L'Matzah Shvi'is, now we penalize you rabbinically and you're not allowed to use it in the 8th year. But we learned, if one improved the field by fertilizing it on Shemitah and then passed away, the son is not penalized and he's allowed to plant the field in the 8th year. Alma, with the day comes to Rabbanan. You see that the penalty against him, what do you call it, was only against the person. To the son, they did not establish the penalty. Over here, that somebody's scheduled work on Chalamoid and passed away, the punishment was in him, not in his money. Okay, we're now on 13A2. Omar Abaya, Niktina, we also have a tradition. If one deliberately contaminated kosher food of somebody else, tahor food of somebody else, right? And then died, like Konsub and Ayachrov, they didn't penalize the surviving son that they would have to pay that other person to get papers damaged. My Tama, why doesn't this estate have to pay? Hezek she'eino nikra loy shemei hezek. It's a major rule. Damage that is unrecognizable is not considered damage. Tuma and Tahara, purity and contamination, is you cannot see it. It's a spiritual idea. A spiritual idea, hey, in fact, it's negligence. But I can't punish you for it. So, for an example, I was talking to my father yesterday about honoring your father and your mother, and it's what they call. But I said the example you mean with God, you choose to love Him, you choose to believe in Him. So my father's first reaction was, "No, you don't. You have to." And I said, "No, that's not true. You choose to do it." The thing is, you don't see it. Love is not a tangible thing. Love is an emotional thing. It's in the heart and the soul. It's in your heart and your mind. It manifests itself physically out, but it comes from inside. Tumah and Tahara is the same idea. Tumah and Tahara is something, today we don't even know from it. We don't think about it twice because we're all Tumah Mace. We're all corpse contaminated. There's no red heifer to purify us. And we don't think about it. But in the days when they did think about it, it was a major, major part of their lives. So what it goes. So, okay, Lidi Dayu, Kinsu Rabbanan. Right? Against him, they punished him. The Berei like Kinsu Rabbanan. Very good. The next Mishnah. Here we go. Okay, ain't like Chimbatum Avodim Bebeimah. We do not purchase homes, slaves, or animals on Kalamayit. Only if you need it for the mayit. Or you go ahead and you deliberately buy something so that the seller will have some money to buy food. This is very, very important. In other words, the Mishnah just said, support your local establishment. In other words, support Lax and Bagel and support Ditness. Read those words again. Or, even though it's Chalamoid, deliberately go buy stuff that you don't need. You don't need for Chalamoid. But you're allowed to do it to get money to him so that he can get his things for Yontif. It's a beautiful concept. Why? Because Kol Yisrael Areidim Zelazeh. All Jews are responsible one for the other. We're all one body. There isn't two classes. There's only one class, Jews. With regard to wages on Chalamayit for one who does not have an entity to eat, what's the din? Are you allowed to do it? Is it only for a needy seller or even for a needy worker? Amalei, Tanina, we learned. Or for the needs of the seller who does not eat. What's the oi? And lovely, means also the wages of a worker who needs the money to eat. Amalei, no, Perusha come first. Yeah, you're twisting it in. It means Amis is talking about a needy seller. It tells me nothing about a worker. Abaya asks Rabba, ain't Kais Mishtachai B'Moed. We do not write loan documents on Chalamoid. The im ain't Aminu. We're now on 1383. If the lender does not trust the borrower, or the borrower has nothing to eat, you can write the document. What does it mean? Lovely schar to pay the work, to pay the workers. Shma mino, exactly right. Says the Gemara, Moshe Rav Sheshes, wait a minute. The Chachamim say, Shloisha umaniyos, oisim malacha be'erbe Pesach HaChatzos. 3 kind of crafts are allowed to be done on Erev Pesach before midday. Ha-chayotin, the tailors, va-separin, the barber, va-kaisin, the launderer. Ha-chatoye, the tailors, because an unskilled person is allowed to sew in his usual manner on Chalamoid. We said somebody who's not an artisan is allowed to sew on Chalamoid. If he's allowed to do it on Chalamoid, he certainly could do it on Pesach. Ha-separim va-kaisin, the barber and the laundry. Shekain Havayim and Medina Sayam. Oh no, Shekain Hedyet. What did it go right? No, I'm sorry. I got the right place. Shekain Havayim Medina Sayam Yoitz in the base here. Because a person who comes from overseas or came out of prison, you're allowed to cut his hair and launder his clothes even on Chalamoid. Since it's allowed on Chalamoid, you definitely could do it at Pesach. The Isa could have divided towards Schar Pu'ula. If paying the wages for a worker who has nothing to eat is allowed on Chalamoid, that in that case, all work, not just these 3 things, should be allowed on Erev Pesach. Because there are the workers that need to get paid so they can have money to buy stuff for Pesach. Says the Gemara, right? Well, now, Maskabla Papa says, wait a minute, if that's true, that you want to come in, you want to say, you want to allow all work to be done Erev Pesach because of workers that need the money to eat. In that case, Binyan Lishtar, you should allow full-fledged building on Erev Pesach. Because the case of a wall that's leaning dangerously into the public domain, 13A4. We're allowed to demolish and rebuild some Chalamoid in the usual manner because of the danger, and because once you knock down the wall, his house is unprotected, so you're allowed to build up a wall as well. So what do you see? But nobody allows this on Erev Pesach. Says the Gemara, and Rabbeinu also asks, a scribe should be allowed to scribe even on Erev Pesach. Because the law is he's allowed to write documents of engagement, of betrothal, not marriage, but betrothal, divorce, and receipts on Chalamoid. Are you, Rabbi Sheshes, comparing Chalamoid with Erev Pesach with regard to work? Just like these are separate reasons to prohibit work on Chalamoid, so and on Erev Pesach, so too there are separate reasons to allow work at these times.
You cannot compare it.
What?
It's not comparable.
Right. Well, it is comparable, but in a different way. Moed mishum tirchu. Moed, because of a tircha, you're not allowed to work.
Right.
It's because you're going to ruin your simcha. But nonetheless, in a case of financial loss, sharu rabbanan, they allowed you to do it, right? If one lacks food, he's allowed to do it. He's allowed to work, right? The prohibition of the 14th of Nisan is because of the yontif, to show that, in other words, don't work so that you'll have plenty of time to prepare for the Seder that night. But if somebody needs something for the Seder, in other words, he needs to buy matzahs and grape juice, he needs to allow it. Simple. The Mishnah says further, we just have a couple of minutes here. We'll get to Amud Beis. We do not move items from a house in one courtyard to a house in another courtyard. 2 different courtyards on Chalamoid. He can move items to a house in one's own courtyard. So in your own courtyard, you can move things around from one house to another house, but not from one courtyard. So you can't take it from Boca Grove to Estancia, for an example. Ein Mavi and Kalim We do not bring vessels from the house of the craftsman on the Kalamoy. You had something by the craftsman, you left it there, he fixed up, let's say he fixed up your cup, it broke, and he fixed it. You cannot pick it up from him on Kalamoy. But if you fear that it will be stolen because that guy leaves his doors wide open, you're allowed to move him to a different courtyard, close to the craftsman. We're now on 13A5. So says the Gemara, but you said at the beginning that you're not allowed to move objects from a house in one courtyard to a house in another one at all. So how could you say that you're allowed to move things in a house in your own courtyard? It's coming to teach us the case of moving objects from a house in the same courtyard. Meaning, when you take things from Broken Grove to Anstancia, people are going to see you carrying the stuff. They're going to think you're working in your own place. If I take something from my house and bring it down Mandarin to Jerry's house, that's not a problem, right? Because no one's going to think it's anything funny about it. And you're not allowed to go pick up kalim from the house of the craftsman. To sharpen our wits, Rabba wants to ask us the following question. Tanan, we learned in a Mishnah, our Mishnah. You're not allowed to pick up vessels, you're not allowed to pick up stuff from the house of the craftsman. But we learned in a different Mishnah in Bisat Pesachim. We can take vessels and bring them from the house of the craftsman, even though they're not needed for the yontif. So Mashinile, and we answered him, the Mishnah over there, Pesachim is talking about Erev Yontif, Erev Pesach. Our Mishnah over here is talking about on the yontif on Chol Hamoed. Or another answer. It's talking about Chol Hamoed. Here where it says you're not allowed to take it is where the owner trusts the craftsman. It's where you don't trust the craftsman. We're now on 13B1. 13B1. V'atanya, we learned maybe in Kalim, you're allowed to bring vessels from the house of the craftsman on Chol Hamoed that he fixed up. Like a picture from a potter's house or a goblet from a glassmaker's house, because these are needed for the yontif. You need the pot and you need the kais. But not wool from the dyer's house, because you don't need it. You have clothes. Nor vessels from the house of a craftsman. But if the craftsman has nothing to eat, you can pay him his wage for fixing up your thing. And then leave it there and you'll pick it up from him after yontif. If you don't trust him, put it somewhere in a house near the craftsman in the same courtyard. But if you're afraid that courtyard is not well protected and stuff will get stolen, right? Go ahead and put it in a different courtyard, but don't transport it at home. But if you don't trust even the other courtyards, you can bring it privately into your own home. You have resolved, says Rava, the contradiction between the law of bringing in the vessels from a craftsman house, but whether you're allowed to carry it and bring it to the craftsman to repair it, that's still a contradiction. Diktani ain't Mavian, because our Mishnah taught you're not allowed to bring vessels. The Kol Shekain Shei Malicha, you're not allowed to pick up the Kol Shekain Me Malicha, and certainly you're not allowed to bring it to them. The Mishnah Pesachim makes it Sorry about that. I had what do you call it? I think so. Let's just finish up. Ella mechabed asari. Just finishing up one line. Ella mechabre the yoshimi kara. It's clear, like we learned earlier, that we're dealing with Chalamoid, and the Mishnah Pesachim is talking about Erev Yom Tov, and therefore there's no problem. Very good.